Do you remember when almost every movie had a video game tie-in? Most of them were, let's be honest, cash grabs. But once in a while, we'd get something special, like Spider-Man 2 or The Lord of the Rings: The Return of the King. For me, Toy Story 2, the video game, was one of those special ones. Or so I thought as a kid. Back in 1999, Toy Story 2 landed on the shelves alongside Pixar's blockbuster sequel in the cinema. Developed by Traveler's Tales, who you might recognize as the studio behind the majority of the recent LEGO games, it followed Buzz Lightyear in his mission to rescue Woody from the greedy hands of Hall, the toy collector. As a kid, this game was one of my absolute favorites. Now, after replaying it, conquering the platinum and experiencing it as an adult, I can confidently say, this game is both better and worse than you remember. Let's break it down. Toy Story 2 was released on a ton of platforms: PlayStation, PC, Dreamcast, and even the Nintendo 64. But if you've played it on anything other than a PlayStation or PC, I'm sorry, you had the short end of the stick. The N64 version? Yeah, it was rough. Reduced frame rates, no cutscenes or FMVs, downgraded audio quality. There wasn't a lot going on in favor of that version. Instead of the cutscenes, you got still frames from the movie with subtitles. But, as with most things, it had a reason for that. The cartridges on the Nintendo 64 simply didn't have enough memory to hold the FMVs used on the superior versions, that were actually snippets of the movie. Sure, they had very low quality for today's standards, but they were there and made the experience richer. The PlayStation and the PC versions are vastly superior, and the game is now part of the PlayStation Plus Classics catalog, along with trophy support. That's how I ended up revisiting it and finally 100%ing it, something I never managed as a kid. Although I'm pretty sure I finished, because I remember the final boss, or bosses, should I say, but we'll get to that later. The game's plot sticks to the movie's core storyline: Buzz and the gang trying to rescue Woody before he's shipped off to a museum in Japan, with his collection set composed by him, Jessie, Bullseye and the Prospector, also known as Stinky Pete. But it also takes creative liberties, imagining the places Buzz might have gone along the way. But it's a game that, although considered by many one of the best licensed games of all time, it still has its strengths and weaknesses. One of the game's biggest selling points at the time was its creative level design. Traveler's Tales didn't just slap together locations from the movie. They built an expanded world that feels cohesive and fresh. Sure, you get iconic spots like Handy's house or Hall's toy barn, but you also explore places like a construction site, alleyways, or even Andy's neighborhood. These extra levels give the game personality and make it feel like more than just a movie tie-in. Just let me say something very quickly right here. I still believe the first level of the game is one of the best in any movie tie-in, making an amazing effort to keep both faithful to the original imagination while keeping it fun on a gameplay standpoint. From jumping around Andy's room like seen several times throughout the movies, to belling an old robot toy in the attic, or even accessing the living room where Andy opened his presents and made all the toys worry about their future in the first movie. The gameplay is clearly inspired by games like Super Mario 64, and it's all about collecting Pizza Planet tokens to progress through levels. They behave almost exactly like the stars in the classic Super Mario Adventure of the Nintendo 64. Each level has 5 tokens tied to different objectives: defeating mini-bosses, solving puzzles, finding one in a decently hidden spot, and, of course, fetching 5 items for an NPC. You can tackle these tasks in any order, and some tokens even require gadgets you unlock later with Mr. Potato Heads, encouraging exploration and replayability. Talking about these upgrades and gadgets, yeah, they're fun, but I just wish they'd been used more throughout the game. You have rocket boots, a grappling hook, a shield, and even gravity boots. Another thing I really like is the variety of enemies. Traveler's Tales lean into the toy theme hard: bouncing balls, wind-up robots, and even Zurg's minions. It keeps things fun and ties the game back to its source material in a way that works. They also get tougher with the progression of levels, as with almost any other game. But for all its charm, Toy Story 2 has some glaring issues. The camera is by far the biggest offender. It's clunky, unresponsive, and will fight you every step of the way. Combine that with Buzz's somewhat limited movement options, and you are in for some frustrating moments. You can't just move the camera around. Instead, it fixes on Buzz's back, but it waits for you to stop it before slowing snapping into place. You can also use the triggers to somewhat control both Buzz's rotation and the camera, but it's so weird that I got through the entire game without fully understanding how it works. Buzz's arsenal of attacks, his laser, stomp and spin, gets the job done, but it's nothing groundbreaking. Even the charged versions of the laser and spin don't add much depth. After a while, the combat and platforming start to feel a bit repetitive, at least on my books. And let's talk about the difficulty. This game is easy. The boss battles, over in a few hits. Even the later ones don't have much going on their favor. The very last one isn't even that special. It's in fact the 3 bosses of the last levels at the same time. It's weird really, because they could have made something really interesting, especially when looking at the boss designs that came up. It just feels out they ran out of development time and had to cram up something as the last boss. Then there's the token objectives. Most of them are straightforward, and that's okay. But then you have wrecks on every level that just says almost exactly what you have to do to get them. It feeds you more than hints. I would have preferred a more open-ended approach, like Super Mario 64, where figuring out the objectives is part of the fun, even if you have just a slight hint. The fetch quests are another weak spot. Every level has you collecting 5 identical items for an NPC, and by the end of the game, it feels like busy work. A bit more variety here would have gone a long way. For all its faults, I still love this game. And it's a great game, don't get me wrong, especially when looking at the time it was released. Revisiting it brought back so many memories of sitting on my PC as a kid, running through Andy's house and pretending I was Buzz Lightyear. But finally 100%ing it was a bittersweet experience. I loved it, but the game's flaws were so much more apparent now than they were when I was 5 or 6. I also wish the game was just a bit longer, but not too much. For what it is, the length is close to perfect. And the fact that Traveler's Tales patched in trophy support decades later is incredible. It's actually what got me to revisit after all this time, the drive to finally complete it. So, is Toy Story 2 the video game worth playing today? Absolutely, especially if you have played it as a kid. But be ready to wrestle with that camera. If you play it on a PlayStation Classics catalog, you can use the save and load state feature. That helped with the frustration, because sometimes Buzz just misses jumps he shouldn't be missing, where you've done everything correctly. For me, this game is a reminder of why I fell in love with gaming in the first place. It's not perfect, but it's packed with heart, and sometimes that's all you need. Thank you for sticking with me till the very end, and consider liking and subscribing. It helps a lot with reaching out to more people. Have you played this game in the past or recently? Let me know about your experiences in the comment section. Until then, to infinity and beyond.
You're gonna see it's our destiny. You got a friend in me. You got a friend